Hello, I'm Richard Fieldhouse, and welcome to the NESGP podcast, The Art of GP Locuming, which is going out on podcast channels, but also on YouTube video as well. And today I'm delighted to be in conversation with Dr. Toni Hazell, who is Chair of Haringey LMC. Welcome, Toni, to the podcast.
Hi, Richard. Thanks very much for having me.
Really good to have you on board. So, Toni, I've come across you in all sorts of ways over the years. I think largely with listening to the Royal College of GPs podcast on clinical topics. I often hear your dulcet tones as I've been driving to and from work, and also got to know you through your leadership role as chair of an LMC and the support you give to general practice in that role. So what I'd really like to do is talk to you really about why you became a GP, a bit about your training, a bit about your experience to arrive at where we are today. So where did it all start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. I should probably say that obviously I'm kind of here as me, not on behalf of any of,
Yes.
the various organizations that I work for. So I went to St Mary's Hospital Medical School. I'm a Mary's girl, even though it merged as part of Imperial while I was there. And actually pretty much the only thing I knew when I started medical school is that I didn't want to be a GP because as with I think many sort of fit, healthy 18-year-olds, you don't see a GP very often, do you? And you just think that uh, you get that trope, don't you, during work experience and hospital things as a student that your GPs are failed surgeons, and it's not what you want to do. And then in the fourth year, I had an absolutely amazing GP rotation. We did a month in London and a week or so outside London. And my London GP was fantastic. She'd been in the practice for decades. I still remember one patient she saw who came in with what, from a medical student's perspective, just sounded like garbled nonsense. I couldn't understand the point of the consultation. And after the patient had left, she said, his wife died 15 years ago this week. He always comes in here around this time of year. It's never anything, but I looked after her and I think he just wants that connection. And I thought, oh wow,
Oh,
that is absolutely amazing. That's sort of proper medicine. And then I did a fantastic out of London experience up in Whitby with Terry McCormack, who you've probably heard of from he does a lot of the heart cardiovascular guidelines, who taught me that if a farmer comes into the GP practice, you should probably send them straight to ITU because they pretty much never come in. They're very stoic. So I was absolutely turned on to general practice from there, and I went straight from my house jobs into the Norfolk Park VTS and never looked back.
wow. And when you finished your training, how did you then, did you get into any substantive roles? How did your sort of actual GP career go from there?
Yeah, so my GP training post, I had a split VTS, but my second GP training post was in Northwood, so it's a very affluent area, sort of just north of London. And then looking around, there was, I think, what we would probably call a spin scheme now, being advertised in Tottenham, where you could do 6 sessions of GP and 2 sessions of a special interest, which they would help you to find. So I thought that would be interesting, both for the difference in demographics, very affluent area to very deprived inner city area. And also, I'd already started to develop a bit of an interest in women's health. I'd started the process of doing what was then called the Faculty of Family Planning diploma. I'd got some funding to learn to fit implants and intrauterine devices. So I moved to Tottenham and I did 6 sessions as GP, one in family planning, one in sexual health. And the scheme actually had a sort of VTS kind of session for a year, which was absolutely brilliant as a newly qualified GP.
Wow.
And I think I probably thought I'd stay there a couple of years and then move somewhere slightly more in the middle demographics wise. And next month, it will be 21 years at the same practice.
Oh, so you've been there ever since, have you?
Yeah.
Right. And is that as a partner, as salary GP?
No, I've always been salaried. So I have been offered a partnership, but it was at that same time really that I was developing more of a sort of portfolio role and actually looking to drop a bit of the daytime GP for some of the other um, portfolio things. And I think I'm a bit of a control freak. I think if it was my name over the door, I'd want to be there, at least 3-4 days a week, which doesn't really fit in with all the other things that I've been doing.
So the salaried role, I guess, gave you a bit of a bit of an option to do that other stuff. And what was it that drew you to those other non salary GP roles? And these are also, are you talking about non-clinical roles here as well?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that the salaried role gives you sort of solid base, and I'm only in practice now on a Thursday, but that's kind of the sort of anchor of my week, and I am pleased that, I did 10 sessions a week for 4 years, which I think you'd burn out
No,
these days doing
really.
it, but this was the early 2000s, and then I did 6 a week for quite a while, and I do feel that getting those sort of clinical miles under my belt
Mm.
made me confident. I worry when I see people coming out of a VTS and going straight into 1 or 2 sessions a week. I wonder if I would have ever developed the clinical confidence having done that. I think that's much harder. Um, so yeah, so that has been good. And then the portfolio thing, it kind of sort of happened. So what's it they say? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. It wasn't really a kind of well-planned move. I'd gone down to 6 sessions a week after having my first child, and I happened to see an advert for an e-learning post at the RCGP, in one of those emails you get from the
Mm.
college every week, and I thought, "Well, that sounds interesting," and as sort of all parents with young kids, I'd been slightly horrified by the astronomical cost of childcare. So I thought, well, this is great. This is something I can do in evenings and weekends because it was 8 hours a week and I won't need any extra childcare. And so I applied for that. And this was 2014. So e-learning wasn't a thing nearly so much. Most of my education to that point had been going to sit
Mm.
in
In
lecture
person.
theatres. Yeah, and really my first interaction with e-learning was when I was preparing for the interview. So I applied for that job, and got it, and that has been a really good start. I've been working there ever since, and I've sort of been involved with all aspects of the creation, from the content to sort of images and animations and interactions. So that's been a fantastic education, and I really like it.
Well, so like a full stack educationalist, I think we might
Mm.
call those. That's really interesting. So I guess is that that must involve quite a bit of a creativity to do to do all the peripheral stuff around the actual learning as well, and some certain IT skills as well. That you just pick those up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't do the actual building of it on the site. The professional instructional designers we work with do a fantastic job. But when we're sort of creating the PowerPoint, I'll sort of put in, blocks that says, click on this or whatever to kind of give an idea of sort of how I want it to work. And yeah, absolutely, because I think general practice is sort of different. We start from a different place maybe than consultants because we start from non-specific symptoms. Our patients don't have a diagnosis when they come to see us. And so education created by GPs for GPs is, I think, often more helpful. There are some consultants who are really fantastic at talking to GPs and talking to people in primary care and really do get it. But I think I've noticed, sort of being around in conferences over the years, that more and more they're looking for GPs or consultants who work somewhere in primary care, possibly to talk more than your sort of very tertiary consultant who of necessity is going to just have a bit of a different view on things.
Because your experience as a GP, you've got that generalist approach. You've also got that undifferentiated care approach, and I guess also that risk management approach. I often think of general practice is kind of all about risk management, isn't it? You have
Yeah.
an undifferentiated diagnosis. What are the chances of this being totally benign? What are the chances of this being extremely malignant? And you've got to balance that with resources and everything, and it's putting the whole contextual, I guess, in your community as well. And I guess the fact that you've been most of your GP career has been in one community as well, which I take it is Haringey. Is that the
Yes,
yeah.
so that's Tottenham. That's Tottenham in Harrogate, and that is really nice because I think if I started somewhere just working 1 day a week, it would be very difficult to build up that continuity of care.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've got patients who, I'm looking after someone who's, I don't know, 18, and I looked after his mum when
Oh,
she was
oh,
pregnant with him,
oh,
which is really nice. And also some cohort who come and see me because I do quite a lot of women's health stuff, menopause, complicated contraception,
yes.
that sort of thing. So that the length of time I've been there helps with the continuity because that's why we all do GP, isn't it,
Yeah.
really?
And you mentioned you said how your the day job as a GP allows you to approach the clinical learning from a generalist type approach. But equally, I guess there must be some payback too from your educational role, your deep diving, I guess, into a clinical subject. I guess that must also, as well as obviously helping so many others with learning and 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 that kind of thing, and confidence and everything else. But also, it must also help you in your clinical practice when I guess you've been doing a learning module and there you have a patient with those sort of symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it helps my appraisal no end. I don't have that awful thing where you open up your portfolio 2 weeks before and think,
What have
"What
I
exactly have I
done?
done this year?"
Yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely, it helps my own practice. I can sort of cascade things throughout the surgery or on sort of social media or whatever. I do some of the women's health training sometimes for our
Oh,
registrars
wow.
and our F2. So yeah, absolutely. And I actually feel that I'm a better GP for doing less of it because the sort of the move to portfolio GP was partly a sort of pull factor um of interesting roles that came up, but also the sort of push factor of 6 sessions of general practice plus the e-learning plus 2 small kids at home was quite stressful as the NHS and primary care was maybe becoming a bit more a difficult place to work.
Yes, and I guess also I often think of this sort of kind of emotionally, having not having all your eggs in one basket allows you sometimes to sort of slightly balance the stresses you might be having in one with a, well, there's also the other job and I enjoy that at the moment. So, and you can, you balance those as well.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
do the other GPs and staff in the practice where you work then sort of almost see you in a as a in a different way? Do they are those skills you've got from outside of the regular salary GP role? Do they come into how you work in your practice, how you're utilised by the team? Do you do any specialist clinics because of that, or do people say, "Oh, I've just listened to one of Tony's podcasts or whatever. I actually might suggest you book an appointment with Dr. Hazell next time." Does that happen?
Yeah, I think so. So I do a fair bit of the menopause stuff, and I think as much as anything else, we do full phone triage. If someone rings up and it's about menopause and I'm there, then reception will often sort of put them in with me, and sometimes the other doctors will come for queries. And obviously, it's quid pro quo. One of the partners at our practice used to be a cardiologist, which is great because my ECG knowledge could do with being improved. So I often show my ECGs to him. And during the pandemic, so we did a lot of e-learning at the college during the pandemic. And if you remember, you'd get these massive documents, 20, 30 pages would come out from NHS England. And we tried to simplify them on things like shielding into maybe a 5 or 10 slide PowerPoint that your average GP would actually have a chance to read. And actually our e-learning became part of the official sort of DHSC way of getting the message out. So they signposted to it, and so I sort of became de facto shielding lead in the practice, and I think that was useful for them, and I knew the rules, and well, I sometimes knew the rules because if you remember, there were times when no one understood the rules, but I probably knew them better than
Yeah,
others.
yeah. I guess that in general too, as a practice, it's an illustration of the completely different skills and approaches you have from the different clinicians that patients have access to. Rather than I guess kind of almost being siloed with one approach. Your practice is able to offer different skills, different experiences. Um, Going back to so in terms of the local medical committee, then how did you get involved with your local LMC to begin with?
So, when I joined the practice, the senior partner at the practice at the time, Martin Lindsay, was chair of Haringey LMC
Ah,
at the time. Um, and he was my mentor because I had joined as a newly qualified GP, so they gave me a mentor. And from time to time, I'd go in to see with something about a fit note, and he'd sort of mutter, "Oh, the hospital should have done this when they saw the patient," or whatever. So from an early stage, I was doing the kind of bouncing things back, which I think is quite common now,
mm,
but maybe wasn't so common. I was maybe sort of thinking about that primary secondary care interface a lot earlier than some people were. And then yeah, I got chatting a few years later at a conference to Sue Dickey, who was the then chair of Haringey LMC after Martin had moved on. And she said, "You're doing all this LMC stuff and you're not on the LMC and we've got space, come and join." So I stood at the next election. I mean, I say election, I don't think we've ever had more people than there have been spaces. So it's been more like appointment. But and yeah, and I was there for a term or two, and then Sue stepped down, and then after needing to be persuaded a bit that, it was okay to be chair of the LMC if you weren't a GP partner, I took on the chair, 2 or 3 years ago, I think.
wow. And was that a big step change in your, I guess, in your portfolio? Did it change things significantly, or was it more of a gentle ease into it?
Yeah, it did a fair bit. I mean, I had already become quite involved in that. I had taken on various meetings outside of the LMC. So we have our LMC meetings 5 times a year, and then the sort of call will go out, we need someone to represent the LMC on this meeting with the ICB or the CCG as it was, or whoever. So I'd already done a bit of that. Um, but becoming chair of the LMC means you do more. I'm chatting more to the chairs of the other 4 LMCs in North Central London, so Barnet, Islington, Enfield and Camden, because obviously we all have the same issues. We refer to the same hospitals. And so, yeah, there's more of that sort of planning, looking at pathways, trying to make sure that when pathways are planned, the GP voice is heard, looking at things like shared care, making sure it actually is shared, a letter that says, "Please prescribe under shared care, we will discharge the patient." That's not the dictionary definition of shared. So it's great, and I really enjoy it. I think you start with these things. You start and you're kind of like, "Yeah, I'm going to change the world and put everything to rights," within a month or so, and then you start to realize that actually, if you can make a noticeable change, even if it's quite small, then you've
Yeah.
done really well. You manage
Got
your
I
expectations.
that but that's quite a that's q that I would Churchill say, the beginning of wisdom is the abandonment of aspirations for a fine lawn. It sounds like you've, I mean, that to change from that aspirational to actually a very pragmatic approach, that's quite a lot of letting go, which,
Mm.
as a control freak, your words, not mine, I imagine that for you as a person, I'm getting a feeling that you're quite open-minded, you're open to change, and you've got all this very open door can do type of approach. I bet that's been really good for you.
Yeah, yeah, I think it has. It's been really interesting seeing how systems work,
Hmm.
or don't work. Quite often you look at how a system is and you think, "Gosh, if I was planning this, you really wouldn't start from here." Seeing how hospitals interact with primary care, the different boroughs, all the different organisations, and seeing what can realistically be done. It's been a massive learning curve.
I bet. And it was lovely to hear you talk about working in such a nice collegiate way with the other 4 LMCs in your and it's North Central London you're in. I was
Yeah.
people I've often heard London, for people who don't live in London, but people who London or don't know London, so it's all often talked about as lots of little villages in a town, and then those towns are all part of a city. And I guess Haringey is almost like a village, or is a village, and then you've got the but I guess as an LMC in Haringey, North Central London, and the rest of London, are the how do, so I know you have the London-wide LMCs, and of course we interviewed Lisa a couple of months ago on this podcast as well, and it was really interesting to get that sort of whole holistic London type approach. So you are kind of in the at the village side of things. It sounds like you are still there making change, and it's very local as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It is slightly different than being a chair of an LMC outside London, because as you say, the London LMCs are all sort of subgroups of London wide. So we have that support structure, which is absolutely fantastic. And
Mm.
as you know what it's like in general practice, you end up sort of doing most things yourself. So, when someone says, "Oh yeah, just email so and so and she'll sort out the diary and manage the meeting and create the Teams link," and you think, "Great, fantastic." And they obviously have all the sort of strategic planning, and Lisa is very involved, as you say, with all the neighbourhood stuff and the tenure planning, and Michelle Drage before her. So
Yes.
yeah, it's really good to be sort of part of that wider structure. Then NCL is, I guess, a sort of smaller town within that big city, and we're merging with Northwest London as an ICB. So I don't know how that is going to
Oh,
how that will pan out from a sort of LMC point of view.
yeah. It could go really well, or they could be fighting on the streets. Who knows? With all this change going on. Okay, that's really interesting. And so coming back then, in terms of a lot of our audience will be sessional GPs, salary GPs, GP locums, but also we make a special effort to let other LMCs know about these podcasts. If we're particularly if we're talking to someone, and I know you've said this podcast is about you rather than about the LMC, but it's lovely to hear how that balance and that portfolio works. But it'd be interesting to find out more a bit about how as GP locums, as salary GPs, what sort of support um, um, the LMCs can do for us, but also what we can do for LMCs. You've clearly stepped up. You're in this fantastic role, and how can other GPs? Would you say to other sessional GPs out there to be more involved with their local medical committee?
Yeah, definitely. So to sort of take the kind of what can your LMC do for you sort of thing first. So London Wide has a GP support unit, and they absolutely are there for salaried GPs as well as partners. Um, they're not a trade union, so they're not a replacement for being in a trade union. And if it's a sort of contractual dispute, they will they will say that you should contact your trade union. But if things sort of wider things are happening, maybe a problematic practice is going through difficult times, and you're the salaried GP in the middle of it, and
Mm,
you're concerned about, are things safe, and I don't feel like I've got much agency in this situation, or there's a merger going on, or absolute sort of variety of things, then they can be very helpful, and they often do know quite a lot about what is sort of going on the ground locally. And so anyone can email basically anyone in their LMC, and they can just Google, LMC Haringey or whatever, and you'll
mm,
see all the names and some contact details. So yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of what sort of we can do for the LMC, so we had recently this collective action, which is, was not industrial action. It was really just doing what we are resourced to do, which most people do sort of anyway. So just this realization that there is an absolute tsunami of unresourced work coming from secondary care to primary care. So I would say that about 50% of the letters I get have something like, "Please, can you do a blood test and send me the result? Please, can you refer this patient back to me in 2 to 3 years? Please, can you refer this patient to the same department at another hospital because they need a procedure that we can't manage?" All stuff that should be done directly in primary care. And if we don't, as a collective of GPs, keep bouncing this stuff back, then it will keep coming, and we just don't have the time. I think it takes up at least an hour or two of my time per clinical day. If you extrapolate that to all the GPs nationwide, just think how many more patients we could see without time.
Mm, mm. And what about GP locums in terms of support from and also supporting the LMC? How can they get more involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is slightly trickier if you are a GP locum, because obviously you don't have the job security that a salary GP has with an employment contract. And it is maybe harder to know what the sort of the vibe in your practice has. Is it a practice that bounces stuff like that back, or is it not? And if you are going against that feeling, are you going to get complaints? So I do completely understand that it's harder for locum GPs, but I really would, support locum GPs to sort of, be aware of this stuff, and think about if they are looking at letters and things, asking secondary care to do their own work where it's appropriate, telling patients that no, you should have had a fit note provided when you left the hospital after surgery, that sort of thing. And the LMC can provide support for locums in the same way, if it's again not to replace a sort of trade union, but
Mm.
if there is something, and if they work predominantly in that area.
And I often, in my experience as a GP locum, and in my career, I've worked in up to 35 different practices a year. Of as you get to know practices in different areas well, you get to know the systems and process. You get to work in different counties, different hospitals, and the value of that insight and that experience you get of what's best practice in one place is just terrible practice in another. And had to have a forum to share that and sort of pass that up the food chain, as it were. I think again, if you've got a local LMC that's receptive to support the LMC and feed that information back to them, it can again really help the communities that you serve as a GP locum.
Yeah, absolutely. And locums can join the LMC. We've just had the last round of elections in London, but people can be, if there's space, people can be co-opted in
Fantastic.
between. So I will put out a plug that we currently have several vacancies in Haringey. So if anyone works predominantly in Haringey, as locum salary partner and is interested, then, we definitely would like to hear from you, because we do need more GPs sort of, working on this stuff.
And I think from what I hear from other LMCs as well, many LMCs are in the same position. So anybody listening
Mm.
to this, if you don't live in Haringey but work predominantly elsewhere, get in touch with
Yeah.
that LMC. It's relatively easy. It's very easy to find out who your local LMC is, and get involved, and it's part of that a great portfolio that any GP can have. So Tony, so lastly, I guess, kind of as a profession, you've been in it a good couple of decades now. Where are we going? What's happening, in your opinion?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. So I suppose from the education sort of point of
Mhm.
view first, obviously things have changed massively from the days when pretty much all education was sitting in a lecture theatre, and then sort of online education happened. And I think there is a move towards different sort of types and lengths of education. So, you've got, if you want to learn about something in detail, you want to do a deep dive course or a long module or something. But actually, if you've got a spare 5 to 10 minutes, then the kind of micro learning um, aspect of things is a really interesting sort of new development. I mean, we've seen it in Duolingo. How many people are learning a language on Duolingo on the bus or on the tube? And so I got involved really again by chance in a micro learning app called Praktiki, which has been really fun. It's my
Mm.
first experience of working with AI. So we use AI to sort of generate the first draft of this stuff. But then a GP, myself or one of my colleagues, goes through it and make sure it's relevant for primary care and accurate, and all the references are up to date. And that's been really interesting. And we've got cases and MCQs and podcasts, although we still can't get past the podcast voice being a little bit AI and artificial. Um,
Yeah.
but
I promise I'm not AI.
yes. But yeah, so that's really interesting. And I would say, because one of the other things I do as an appraiser, seeing how people learn so differently over the years has been really interesting. So some doctors do almost all of their learning through podcasts, particularly those who have a long commute, maybe in a car, who have a dog that they walk every day. Others prefer things that they can look at. Some people like interacting, so I think on the sort of educational point of view, it's completely changed. And I'm really, really pleased that we've ditched this thing of 50 hours and we've gone to more, what can you learn that is relevant for you? How do you keep up to date that is relevant to your career and that helps you to sort of sort out your learning objectives and kind of fill in those gaps in your knowledge. And similarly at the RCGP, we've got like little 5-minute screencasts. So I think that has been really good from an educational point of view. From a sort of careers thing, I think when I sort of started to become a portfolio GP, it almost wasn't a thing. I'm not sure it was even kind of a word that people really used. Certainly not as much as they do now. So um, I think the thing is just to be open to absolutely every opportunity. So as I said, my career sort of developed, I think, through a mix of kind of push and pull factors, but really because whenever an opportunity has come up, I've usually kind of given it a go. And some things have really worked and some things have been a disaster. And I've done 6 months and thought, well, I know that I don't want to do that kind of job again. It just doesn't suit me. But, I've learned from it. So I think being open to people, being out there and contactable, there's such a fantastic GP community out there on social media. I think that's the message. Just be interested in different things in your career, developing different ways, and don't expect it to go how you first planned.
And I'm getting this from you as well. You don't have a fear of failure that holds you back. You try new things and you iterate, and if it doesn't go well, you change plan, and I think that's a very healthy. Did you think do you identify yourself in that sort of way?
Yeah, I think so. It's taken a bit of work. I think I've sort of had to get on top of my imposter syndrome,
Yeah, yeah.
which I think is a very female thing. I do mock interviews for the medics at my daughter's school, or girls, and I often have to say, don't start your answers with "Well, I'm not sure, but," or "This is probably wrong, but," and you know do you think the boys at the boys' school are starting their answers with that?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
probably
good
not. So
point,
I
good
think
point.
particularly women in medicine, we do have to kind of stand up and say, yeah, actually, we have a load of skills, and we should be prepared to use them and sort of be proud of the skills that we've achieved, even if they are different from what a traditional medical career looks like.
If can request here in your role as an educationist, is that something we can do an episode, not an episode or some e-learning from the Royal College on this thing about confidence in female GPs? I remember some years ago as one of my fellow ICB clinical directors who was female, was really apologising for sounding bossy, and she was way less bossy than all the blokes, but it was just this different way, this tropes that we have, and so yes, I think it's often I don't think like at your daughter's school, you necessarily appreciate that there might be a difference between different people about how we present ourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's very true. And one of my other sort of hats that I wear, I'm one of the directors of the Primary Care Women's Health Society. So we do a lot of education on women's health, and not really intentionally, but we are an entirely female board of directors. Just more women than men tend to go into women's
Fantastic.
health, although we're always trying to,
Yeah. Yeah.
attract men to have an interest into it as well. And it is really interesting, working with this group of sort of, incredibly interesting and talented women who have loads and loads of different skills, and seeing how their careers you know have developed, and what they've got to offer, and bringing some of those women's health skills and procedures and stuff into primary care.
I think in that, Tony, you're an absolute role model. Listen, it's been really lovely to talk to you on this podcast. So interesting. I think that you've got a lot to say, and I'm sure over the coming years we're going to be hearing a lot more from Dr. Toni Hazell in all these different guises. So, Toni, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today. Thank you everybody for listening to the NASU podcast. Please do subscribe and give us any feedback if you're interested in appearing on the podcast with to chat about your career and any roles you do, no matter what it is. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks again. Thank you, Toni. Goodbye.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye.